let me introduce to you Pushy. He has an unquenchable appetite, and his only diet is wrenches, as fast as you can feed them. Seems the tool world is devolving into chaos, at least on social media, where it means very little, us included, over this usually $130 set of Icon non-slip wrenches from Harbor Freight, and if they beat a set of 3 to 4 times the price, Snap-on Flank Drive Plus. With over 20 million views between platforms, everyone rooting for their favorite team to upset the other. Well, today, just over a year into the making behind the scenes, we have a push-button solution that sort of just tells you the yes and no of things to settle that debate. Well, at least for those willing to appeal to reason, as these wrenches will be tested in an automated machine to industry-recognized standards and beyond, and then ranked to see where they fall. We and other tool tubers have been testing wrenches by hand for years, but really we felt you were owed something better. And when all of the wrench wrecking is done today, we'll tell you why we think everyone has been looking at this all wrong to begin with and really missing the boat here. Let's dive in with a very brief backstory. This all started with an innocent test on a nylon hex or nylon nut brought onto a Snap-on tool truck that head-to-head, yeah, the Snap-on did slip first. Then others pointing out, probably fairly, that this is an old test made for Flank Drive Plus marketing campaign versus standard jaw wrenches, and no one's wrenching on plastic to begin with. But in response, it was Snap-on's own test, so seems somewhat relevant. And lastly, Snap-on dealers saying we should really be asking Snap-on how they test wrenches factory side, and that would be the real answer. Well, we can help with that. This is ASME B107 100-2010 for flat wrenches, the US industry standard we bought for how to test and assess wrenches, including a few chapters in here, combination wrenches. It contains standards for hardness, clearance tolerance measurements, test procedures, and of course proof torque. Now that proof torque is not performed by hand. It's either a CNC machine about half the size of a bedroom, like one of these, and charted on a graph. Yeah, that would be nice to own. Or maybe a bit more old school, one of these, where instead of the hex mandrel turning itself, it turns the wrench, which I think is a bit more lifelike and we liked a lot. It turns the wrench about the center axis transducer until it slips or fails. We tried buying one of these for quite a while. The factory that makes these no longer does, only the massive CNC type now, and no tool manufacturer would sell theirs. So we made one. You might have noticed we've not posted any hand tool or wrench episodes in the past year. You guys are owed, we feel, something better than a guy cranking on a fastener. We bought the digital transducer and support equipment all the way back in June of last year and slowly got to work on this, the wrench dyno. Our Skunk Works division has been heading up for some time now to get it to where it's not only dead nuts consistent over and over on the same wrenches, but matches the results we've gotten from actual factories willing to test the same samples. Which is part of why it's taken over a year. It's basically a 3/4 ton electric ram that pushes an arm bolted to a greased precision ground rod that's mounted directly above the torque transducer. The beauty of this design is all the data is measured here. You could even push on by hand the end of this wrench or pull back on it. Wouldn't make a difference, doesn't affect anything. Everything is measured at the hex. Enough to make any combination wrench here and other stuff we'd like to work on slip or break in half if they're willing to resist that much, up to 1,000 foot-pounds, 1355 newton meters in force if you let it. And that's displayed up here in reverse torque figures. And we made this all DeWalt battery powered, a cordless wrench killer, pretty cool if I do say so myself. So let's get underway. Up first is Harbor Freight, but not their non-slip. It's not even Icon. This is Pittsburgh, their budget set. It's made in India and its jaws look as basic as it gets, which most wrenches do. According to the standard, wrenches are to be tested on a hardened hex mandrel with its own specs that it's supposed to meet. We bought several brands until we found one with rock hard hexes that meet these sizing specs, these being 66 HRC, Japanese chef knife levels of hard, so pretty far removed from nylon hex nuts it seems like the ASME standard prefers. And that looks like this. Because these are metric wrenches, the ASME standard is in newton meters, which for this open end here on 17 millimeters is 139 newton meters, or about 130 foot-pounds. If either unit makes your head spin, fear not, we're going to be measuring these wrenches in percentage of that ASME spec, because 130, 50, 25 foot-pounds or newton meters might not mean anything for you on a specific wrench like it doesn't to me. The Pittsburgh makes 181.8 here, which is 131% using the testing process to the letter of the standard. Now, is that good? Well, we have it on multiple sources of authority. People would traditionally say, as a rule of thumb, that retail places like Home Depot, Harbor Freight traditionally target 100% of ASME proof torque or above. Prosumer brands, maybe stuff like Gear Wrench, Capri, whatever else you want to group in there, 140% of ASME, not to say that they might not exceed that, but as a minimum target. Then tool trucks and professional industrial, your Matcos, Max Snap-ons, Wright, Proto, some European brands like Hazit, Beta maybe, they would all target a minimum of something closer to 150 to 175% of ASME. Again, doesn't guarantee they are better or that other brands wanting to take their business aren't instead using that higher standard to take their sales. So the Pittsburgh, it's not quite up there, but also no icon according even to the store it sold, Harbor Freight. This is where we start to depart from ASME or even DIN metric spec, because this is kind of lame. By itself, in a vacuum, who's working on hardware that's both hard as nails and a perfect hex to the 100th of a millimeter? And if you did, it probably wouldn't matter which wrench you were reaching for. And also infinitely wide surfaces to grab on, for that matter. We'll touch on that a bit later. This is where the versatility of our wrench dyno comes into play and where all this hex stock we've purchased does as well. We bought both hex made to a similar hardness and yield strength as class 8.8 hardware, the most common bolts and nuts you'll find on a vehicle, basically close to grade 5, and through hardened hex stock made to class 10.9 bolts and nuts, similar to US grade 8 that you might see on head bolts and other critical hardware, some suspension pieces here and there. So harder than a nylon plastic nut, but softer than this rock hard hex. You know, like the nuts and bolts these are usually used on. And so with these, like this, what we're calling class 8.8 hex with new 15mm wrench from Pittsburgh here, you'd have a hard time getting above 100% ASME proof torque, which is 104 Newton meters by the book here. The better the wrench's grip, the tighter their tolerances, the more torque you're going to get before these slip. And that makes for just 66% of the standard 68.8 Newton meters. Not great when you're not on a perfect hex in a lab setting. Well, I guess we'll see coming up against the others. And part of the reason for that is the first thing we're scoring here, each of these wrenches on clearance. How much over their nominal size the wrenches are. For 15, 16, 17, 19mm wrenches we're using today, the Pittsburgh comes in at an average of 0.28mm over, so like 17.28 instead of a 17mm wrench. This is done on a glass surface, so the caliper is perpendicular and measuring at the same spot on each wrench. The Harbor Freight Icon wrenches, on the other hand, range from 0.09 to 0.16 over nominal for an average of 0.14mm over. Snap-on shaves a little bit of that across all the new wrenches we purchased to 0.11mm. So it seems like it might be a little bit tighter of a tolerance range they afforded, but also look at the price per piece and per set here for almost 500 bucks. It damn well better be. Let's test some wrenches. Coming to the meat and potatoes of the matter, both the Snap-on and Icon use anti-slip designs. Flink Drive Plus, existing first, and for a while now, has a more subtle design. Icon looking more dramatic, more teeth, deeper cuts, and a V cutout in the jaw. We've both discussed and tested why it's practically, from a physics standpoint, useless. Nothing's coming under tension when the other side is seeing compression forces. It's basically to make it look more dramatic and fancy, and hey, I think it does do that. Starting with the 15mm wrench that Pittsburgh had quite a bit of trouble with, on class 8.8 hardware, the Harbor Freight Icon is able to do this. Each wrench is loaded into Pushy in the same direction for every test. 121.8 Newton meters, that's 117% of the ASME spec. Using class 8.8 grade 5 like hardware, that's not shabby, exceeding the standard with that hex and near doubling its cousin, the Pittsburgh. I think you know where we're going with this. Snap-on Flink Drive Plus up next in the same 15mm stock. Each bit socket or hex stock is replaced or flipped upside down to the other end for each brand. There's no doubt that this wrench, any wrench, is going to turn over the corners on this class of hardware. Just some make it further before slipping. The Snap-on makes it to 122.9, 118%, just barely able to say it bested the icon, and the jaws don't appear to be spreading. They sort of dig and then eventually do round. As a part of our verification testing, we bought a second new 15mm snap-on wrench, and that one, it made it to 122.8 instead of 122.9. New hardware, new wrench, pretty happy with those results. So totaling things on the leaderboard, that's 117, 118, and 66% here for the Pittsburgh, which will start them out with 117, 118, and 66 points. You can find our leaderboards that we add to weekly like this one in the link below. Alright, on class 10.9 hardware, similar to grade 8, since these are non-slip wrenches, we're going head to head here, and we can take this out of the ranking data in future episodes if we like, but we're going to start with 5/8 hex with a 16mm wrench, because people do it, I do it, they're almost the same, but it is a little undersized. 15.875mm, no hardware stays perfect, and this is a consistent way to give these non-slipping wrenches a taste of reality outside of a lab. Because it's a harder fastener material, the Pittsburgh stepped things up to 75% of ASME, and the jaws spread from it didn't seem to like the slightly smaller than perfect size, or it's made too soft as a wrench in general and just prone to spread. The icon, on the other hand, it does do well on this grade 8, slightly smaller than its ideal wrenching size. There are points where it's building torque slowly, and then the torque number pauses, and this is a sign of it slipping, and then it engages again. It does this up to 172 newton meters, or 139% of the standard. I'll take it. Let's see what the Flank Drive Plus can do with the same scenario. The snap-on, and this is probably something you'd feel pushing it yourself on something soft or undersized or otherwise imperfect, doesn't have much of a stutter step here. It builds torque slowly in a consistent ramp, meaning no dead spots of just pure slip. Not that it isn't slipping at all, but every inch it is turning is more fastener torque applied along with it. 193 newton meters is 156% of the standard. That's good stuff, I think. Alright, and last up, for class 10.9 type hardware, we have good old-fashioned 19mm on 19mm. That's just what these wrenches want to see. Well, hardened hex mandrel coming up, but this they enjoyed as well. Even the Pittsburgh here getting in on the action on something not even to the hardware hardness standard. They are passable, they would be allowed out of a factory. Pushy had his work cut out for him on 19mm as we're passing the 100s and 200s here and into the 300s finally. Icon moving up into that professional industrial / tool truck end of percentages here. It seems like that was the target for the brand and more than just marketing. 313.4 newton meters, 168% of the standard. Now, I'm not sure many of us are putting 230 foot-pounds on a 19 or 3/4 inch wrench on the daily or anything, but it is representative of how well some of the other similar sizes might do for you versus other wrenches. And wrench extenders are becoming a more popular thing. Good thing for that lifetime warranty, because this snap-on will have you using your favorite jack handle extension in a hurry, making numbers like 190% of the standard. That's just crazy. That's enough to average between the 16 and 19mm wrench tests on grade 8 that we just did. 154% for Icon, 170% for Snap-on, and even 104 for Pittsburgh. The Snap-on so far hasn't been bested. Let's hit it with the book and see if things change. Pittsburgh got 131% over here from testing using the process outlined by the American Society of Mechanical Engineers. And in the largest gap, wrench over wrench, so far the Icon is going to absolutely stomp the 181 or 130% that the Pittsburgh made. Pulling near 100 newton meters just on top of that and representing for the size around 70% tacked on until this. Yeah, that was scary. Yeah, Pushy don't play. Definitely a new type of failure. The wrench didn't just fly off, it broke off. This is allowed per ASME, it just has to pass a certain level. Slipping is treated the same as braking, but if all were the same, I'd prefer a slow slip to going all Rocky Balboa on a subframe from a broken tool. It is a tough test though. Let's see how the Snap-on gets on. The Flank Drive Plus in its last test does get after it. I can't imagine a scenario you'd need to witness this, but the wrench itself, Icon included in the last test, physically bends on a fastener this stubborn. That'd be your warning sign to go grab an impact or have the new guy with something to prove show you how it's done. The Snap-on also has its own jump scare, but not broken. It did lurch though and makes 209%. Wow. Any engineer is going to be happy looking at 200% here. These are both winners, but ranking these must be done. It's why we're here. They're awarded points in relation to how they measured up against the standard on sort of soft, pretty hard, and very hard wrenching tasks. Here we have a small adjustment for wrench thickness. Making a wrench thicker is sort of the easy route. It's of course useful on like a tie rod arm, but on the other side of the coin, not every bolt head is going to be even thick enough to take advantage of that thickness. Otherwise, you could just weld two wrenches stacked on top of each other and it'd be ranked as the best wrench in the world by ASME standards. We've tested over 45 brands now, so against that average, an Icon wrench is about 2% thicker than average, whereas a Flink Drive Plus measured about 2.7% thinner. The Pittsburgh is a full 15% thinner, I think, for cost reasons though, and that results in some pros and cons here. And this all totals to settle the debate once and for all. Who am I kidding, but we're confident in these results. 558 points, 592 points, and 388, placing the Snap-on in first place, which, considering it wasn't beaten in any category, does pencil out for us. The price gap is ridiculous, but let's remember why we're here. People were saying, channels were showing, and handheld tests, the Icon beating the Snap-on, like we're talking performance head to head. Value's a different story and less black and white on that topic. I know what you're thinking, but Torque Dudes, why is there so much more video left then? Well, if you remember, I mentioned we think everyone's missing the big picture here. If you want to talk value, I don't think a $130 wrench set from Harbor Freight has a monopoly on that title. Sure, there's coupons, but every store does have sales. For one, the same sort of design is licensed for Jaws and the Carlisle and Milwaukee wrenches. There's that monopoly sort of gone. And for number two, let me introduce you to the latest Craftsman Overdrive. I know what you're thinking, Craftsman, not impressed? Well, they do have a few sets, and this one in particular, if you look for this specific model number, well, it's a refresh of Mac Tools RBRT wrenches, which we found to be stupid good. But also not cheap. That set's $330. Craftsman, owned by the same company, Stanley Black & Decker, and their infinite wisdom, decided to make nearly the same wrenches, same case and everything, but a tinted chrome finish, which is pretty cool, I think, though does pick up fingerprints easier, for $75. $75 everyday price, and they even have an 8-17mm for $45 and SAE. As far as I can tell, it's missing two lines or cuts on one side of the jaw versus those RBRT wrenches. Well, let's find out how they do versus the others. Just starting from the bottom here, 15mm going up against a simple class 8.8 hardware. Craftsman Overdrive combo wrench makes 145 Newton meters. Yeah, that's 140% of the standard on a regular bolt you're likely to find all over your car. The first wrench to exceed Snap-on all day. Well, this took like all week for us to film, but you get what I mean. This isn't going to be a trouncing though. Flink Drive Plus is no slouch, either is Icon for that matter. The Craftsman Overdrive hits a bit of a slump when it comes to grade 8, getting 137% on one test with the 16mm. That's actually a 5/8 hex, and overall 19mm it gets 161%, in both cases slightly below the Icon. Lastly, with the 17mm perfect hardened hex mandrel, more surprises. Well, for this one, the type of surprise we should be expecting with this test on really grippy wrenches. Luckily this one didn't break, however, and also 291 Newton meters, just barely, just a little bit extra sprinkled on top of Snap-on's 290.3 for 210%. The downsides, this didn't measure as tightly. Any little bit of wobble is enough to scare me on some bolt heads, so it factors, though not terrible here either. And she's a thick girl, 9.3% above average wrench thickness, so -9 points here. But able to top the Snap-on twice like no one else has. That's good enough for 573 points, a solid second place, and even lower retail price of $75. Performance, bragging rights, still's got to go to number one here, Snap-on, but it's up to you to weigh that performance advantage versus cost. The newer Craftsman can be found so far at Lowe's. We'll add a tag here with the right model numbers. And lastly, their mystery hardness. Filled in here, both Snap-on and Craftsman are quite hard. 46-48 HRC would be typical. This Craftsman also just about matches the Mac Tools we previously tested, so it's made out of the same stuff, and that's a good sign. The Pittsburgh, too soft we think, and it did show at times. Ideally, you want as hard a wrench as you can make it without risk of it fracturing. For Icon, that was 58 HRC here. The wrench was too hard, a full 10 points over the ones we've tested prior. Heat treatment consistency is not a flashy thing to advertise, but it does seem important. Though also, you probably wouldn't get this type of thing to happen by hand. All of these wrenches are good wrenches, except maybe the Pittsburgh. To beat the Icon, we had to pick the set that, based on testing 45 brands prior, we thought could make the upset here. That's what it takes in the modern world to upset Harbor Freight's top of the line. That's not too shabby. This took a long time to make from the start, but we had a lot of fun. If seeing this type of thing from time to time seems not too bothersome, consider subscribing, and thanks as always for watching.